Hello, I'm Corinna Harrod and this is the Monday Night Review. Hello and welcome to episode 146. I don't really know why I'm giving them numbers because I feel like they're not numbered. Anyway, it's around there. Let's go for there. I hope you are all well. It is cold. I have been procrastinating. We had friends to stay for the weekend. I went to a karate grading with a friend. My friend was like, I'll come along. How long is it? And I was like, it's an hour. So off we toddled. 3 hours later, we were released. So that took up quite a lot of my day. I also went in to work at a yard today to get some horses in for the farrier. And the farrier didn't have it in his diary. So I stood in the rain for an hour with two very grumpy horses and one horse who thought she was being left out. So all in all, 3 very grumpy horses. So that kind of sums up my day. How have you been? I really appreciate any reviews, any subscribes, any sharing, anything like that makes such a difference. If you haven't already come and joined the Patreon, then do. There's extra content there. I'm working on a little mini-sode for you this week as we speak. Well, not as we speak, because as we speak, we're speaking. But you see what I mean. Today's episode was actually recommended on the Instagram page. If you don't follow our Instagram, what are you doing? And I stupidly didn't write the name down. But to whoever recommended this, thank you. I've gone down a dentistry wormhole. My pronunciation of some of the dentistry words is problematic, as you'll find out. But today we're going to cover a story that not only had I not heard of, there is actually very minimal information available, which I found quite shocking. Today we're going to talk about the murder of Linda Peacock and the first conviction using forensic odontology. I think that's how you say it. Sorry to any dental people listening. On the evening of the 5th of August 1967, 15-year-old Linda Peacock's parents became concerned when their daughter had not returned home. They lived in the Scottish market town of Biggar, a quiet, close community where their daughter was well known, well liked. Biggar had a traditional rural character with a population of only a few thousand. They were close-knit and centred around agriculture and small local businesses. Linda had gone to the fair with some of her girlfriends. She's described as a happy girl with a love and talent with horses and a good girl, which I hate that description, frankly, because it doesn't really make any difference to what happened to her. But in this tiny community, she was known as the good girl, and therefore not coming home on time was very out of character. But also, when we get to what happened to her, I guess what the implication is that she didn't have it coming because she wasn't living in a way that made her vulnerable. But literally all the descriptions are she was a good girl. Even this rather weird article that's quoted everywhere who says, there was blood and earth found under her nails and she fought to the end because she was a good girl. And it's like, well, I don't know. I have trouble with all this, she really put up a fight and she was badass. And it's like, if you didn't put up a fight when you were being murdered, doesn't mean you're not a badass. I don't know. I digress. Ugh. So Linda had gone to the fair with some of her girlfriends. She'd been dropped into town by a man who was lodging with her family. He had said, do you want me to come and pick you up? But she'd said, don't worry. He'd let her down the week before. I think he was supposed to pick her up from somewhere the week before and hadn't turned up. So she was like, yeah, I'm okay. I'll get a lift with someone or I'll walk. Her home was about a mile or so out of the village, so I don't think she would have, and it's August, so I don't know that she would have necessarily been bothered about walking. Again, it's small, it's rural, everyone knows everyone, so I don't think she was that fussed. Now, the lodger returns home at about 11 o'clock that night, and Linda's parents ask him if he's seen their daughter, and that feeling, because no doubt as long as he was out, they thought, oh, well, maybe he's picked her up and bringing her home, and then that drop they must have had when he appears without their daughter. So Linda's mother immediately goes to the village in the car to see if she can see Linda anywhere. She stops by a few friends and relatives' houses to see if Linda's there. And when she's not, these friends and relatives join the search. So everyone begins looking. And eventually, when Linda can't be found, they notify the police. And 2 police constables join in this search for Linda. Luckily, as far as I can tell, there's no mention of, oh, well, she's probably run away. It was taken quite seriously from the beginning. Now, unfortunately, at 6:40 a.m. the next day, one of the police constables searching the cemetery of St Mary's Church found the body of Linda lying on a gravestone, mostly hidden by a yew tree. This next bit's just a description of how she was found. You may want to skip forward a bit. I'm not going too into it, but if you want to skip forward a few goes. She had 2 visible wounds to her head, which had bled a lot, and her clothes were partially removed. Her breasts were exposed, and it was clear that she'd been dragged. There were ligature marks around her neck and wrists, and the ligature around her wrists seemed to have been removed by burning. Now, neither ligatures were found. I know that Paul Holes would say there's a difference between a ligature and something else, so I'm sorry to not be getting that exactly right. They were able to, from the bits of sisal that they found at the scene, they could see, and they eventually narrowed it down to it had been burned by a petrol lighter. So she'd had her wrists bound, and then the sisal that was binding them had been burnt off and had burnt some of her skin, but that happened post-mortem, I believe, and they couldn't find anything that had been around her neck. Again, I believe they found bits of sisal, so they assumed it was that, but the actual murder weapon wasn't found. Around the churchyard, they found patches of blood, a comb, a purse, and a number of coins, all of which would be identified as belonging to Linda. The scene suggested that Linda had been struck twice on the head, which had caused her to fall, but she'd managed to get up, walk or probably run for about 14 yards, and then was taken down again or fell down, and it was here that she was strangled. Now, although her clothing had been disarranged, she had not been raped, and so if that was the intention, it could be that then it all got out of hand and she was murdered, and actually the attacker didn't complete that aspect of the attack. One very noticeable injury was a circular bruise to Linda's right breast, and they assumed that this had happened during the attack. It was a very noticeable bruise, so it was photographed extensively and looked at, and later analysis would show that this was a bite mark. Now, the crime scene and the crime were incredibly shocking for the community. Also quite improbable. The town had around 3,000 people, slightly less than, and everyone knew everyone. As I said, Linda was a good girl, but she was a well-liked girl. There was no case of her being in with a bad lot or blackmailing any, there wasn't a sort of link anywhere to someone who could do this. Who would want to harm a 15-year-old horse-loving schoolgirl? But there is another aspect to Biggar that I have not mentioned. Loningdale House in Biggar had been a family home until about 1963, when it became an approved school for boys, situated just 500 yards or so from where Linda's body had been found. In the UK during the 1960s, an approved school was a type of residential institution designed to rehabilitate young people who were considered delinquent or in need of care and control. Approved schools were essentially reform schools aimed at helping children and teenagers who had committed minor offences or were deemed at risk of delinquency, providing a structured environment with education and discipline. However, like many approved schools at the time, Loningdale was designed as a residential institution for young offenders, but it became notable for its controversial approach to handling delinquency, involving more permissive experimental methods aimed at reforming young people. There had been a number of concerns about the location of this approved home. It was unusual for one to be sited quite so close to a community, and there was seemingly no collaboration offered to the town to suitably extend amenities to deal with the extra people. For example, extending the hours of street lighting, and there was no collaboration with the town in terms of rehabilitating the boys that were in this approved school. In a document about the school published in 1968 from a politician who had been involved in the case, he said, quote, that very considerable latitude, putting it mildly, was allowed to the boys by the headmaster. They were not only allowed into the town, often unaccompanied, but their unruly behaviour and dirty language caused great offence and had a bad effect upon the youth of the town, both boys and, I regret to say, girls. People were torn. When Linda's body was found, people were torn. They immediately suspected the boys at the approved school. No one wanted to believe that it was somebody from the community, but also they didn't really want to believe their worst fears. They wanted to be proved wrong. People were worried about the approved school and its proximity to the town, but they sort of wanted to be proved wrong, and for these boys to be good boys, that had just gone down the wrong path and were able to be rehabilitated, and not that they'd allowed some almost demon to walk amongst them and do this. But how are they going to find out who killed Linda Peacock? The clues at the crime scene didn't really lead anywhere. Lots of people would have had petrol lighters. Sisal was easy to come by. Nobody really had anything to go on. But the bite mark identified on the body was so distinct that odontologist Dr. Warren Harvey was brought into the investigation and offered his expertise on the matter. And this one, it was almost as unique as a fingerprint. So though forensic dentistry or forensic odontology, I believe it says, the handling, examination and evaluation of dental evidence in a criminal justice context, can be traced back to the late 1800s when the first documented use of dental records for identification occurred. It wasn't until the 1900s when the field began to formalise with its increased understanding of the uniqueness of dental patterns. Now, during this time, dentists started to recognise their role in legal matters, particularly in identifying victims of crime or disaster. But it wouldn't be until the 1980s that professional associations and training programmes began emerging for dentists interested in forensics odontology. The British Dental Association began to engage more with forensic applications, establishing guidelines for practitioners in the 1980s. So in 1968, it was fairly new. And again, it was, can you identify these remains? Can you link these remains to a person rather than the other way round. So a bite mark is defined as a change in surface appearance due to the teeth coming into contact with the surface, leaving behind a dental pattern of the bite. And every individual has a unique dentition that can be identifiable, and this uniqueness can be found in a bite mark left on human skin. Now, I didn't realise it was quite so definite just because your teeth change a lot. So I had perfect, huge teeth until my wisdom teeth came in, and then my teeth went nuts, and then I fainted onto concrete and knocked out half a tooth of on my front teeth. So that is fake. And then I have had what are they called? Invisalign braces. So and I chew my teeth when I sleep. I don't grind them, I set them. I clench my teeth, and so the tops of all my lower teeth have pinged off, and they've pinged off so much that my dentist refuses to replace them. So I feel like my teeth have changed quite a lot over the years, but I'm guessing there will be certain markers that you can look for that either don't change or that don't change in terms of the teeth enamel and that kind of thing. So while the bite mark was being examined, the police were speaking to witnesses who might have seen Linda on the night she was murdered. Now, one witness comes forward claiming to have seen a man and a young woman by the gate to the cemetery on the night of Linda's disappearance at around 10 o'clock. They seemed to be talking amicably, so the witness had thought nothing of it, and even when they'd heard a girl scream 20 minutes after the sighting, they hadn't linked it to the couple that they'd seen before. I would say that, I don't know, there's something not right if you hear a girl scream and you don't do anything in your small, close-knit community. Maybe it's just that because I'm a nosy neighbour, but when I lived in London, anyone made a noise, I was always out there. I used to get involved in fights on the street. My husband would be at home minding his own business, and I'd go in and be like, you never guess what just happened. So, but you'd think, small community, close-knit, hear a girl scream at 10:30 at night, might go and see what's going on. While they're talking to witnesses, the bite mark on Linda's skin is being looked at in depth, and because of pits in the upper anterior teeth resulting from hyperplasia and hypocalcification, it is incredibly distinctive and unusual. Hyperplasia in teeth refers to a developmental defect characterized by the incomplete or underdevelopment of enamel, resulting in a thinner layer of enamel on the teeth. Affected teeth may exhibit discoloration, pitting, grooves, or unusual shapes. The severity can vary. In mild cases, it's barely noticeable. With severe cases, it can lead to significant enamel loss. And that's what I mean. I guess even if you're like me and you've chewed off the tops of your teeth or that kind of thing, if you're a dentist, maybe you can still see the quality of the enamel from the imprint of the teeth. Hypocalcification in teeth refers to a condition where there is deficiency in the mineralization of enamel. So we can basically, this guy has got a real problem with enamel in his teeth, and this leads to areas of underdeveloped or softened enamel. So again, similar to hyperplasia, teeth affected by hypocalcification may appear discolored, which obviously isn't going to help us here, often white, brown, with or yellow spots, have a rough texture or show irregular shapes. The enamel can also be softer than normal, making the teeth more prone to wear and decay. Now, when I first read about this, I was like, surely loads of people have this, but no, it's incredibly rare. Most people have well-developed enamel. Now, I have stainy teeth. That's just the way the enamel holds on to stain, but the hypoplasia and hypercalcification are actually very unusual. So the fact that this person who has left this bite mark has these really distinctive traits can only help in this case. There's also one unusually jagged tooth that's very obvious that would very easily be matched in other dental casts. So more than 3,000 people were checked. No success was achieved. So they check everyone in the town, and everyone is willing to have, and because of this jagged tooth, I think they don't have to take casts of everyone because the jagged tooth is very obvious. And next are the 29 inmates at Loningdale. So Dr. Harvey studies them all and narrows the suspects down to 5, and each was asked to give a dental impression. And at this point, Keith Simpson, a pathologist with 30 years of experience, joins the team. And together with Dr. Harvey, they study all the impressions and they come up with one single suspect. There's only one person this can be, and that's 17-year-old Gordon Hay. Gordon Hay had been brought in for breaking into a factory, and he had proved to have a serious problem with authority. He submitted to having another dental impression made, which showed that one of his teeth was pitted in 2 places, which I believe means there is a pit where the enamel has not formed properly. The pits matched the impressions made on the victim's breast. That meant they felt confident to take this evidence to court, even though such evidence had never before been used as a defining piece of physical evidence in a court case in the UK. In court, Harvey was able to show the cast of 342 soldiers that he had taken, only 2 of whom had pits, and only one of those that had pits was down to hypocalcination. So that shows you how uncommon it is. And both of these were still very different from the cast taken from Hayes. He was also able to show that Hayes's teeth were so unique that it would be virtually impossible to find another set of teeth to match the bite mark on Linda's body. Now, during his trial, Hay maintained that he'd been in his dormitory when the murder had occurred, but actually a number of inmates came forward saying otherwise. One said that Hay came back late that night, dishevelled, covered in blood. Another had said that Hay had spotted Linda at the fair and had said he was going to have sex with her. Again, interesting that there's so little to be found on this case, and it feels like a gross breach of her privacy, but it was found that Linda was a virgin. So he had said he was going to have sex with her. It was found that not only had she not had sex with him, she had not had sex with anyone, and there is nothing to be found. There is no lurid, she was asking for it, she was encouraging him, she was flirting with him at the fair. It just sticks out to me that on this case we have nothing to find. There was no fault on the woman's part. Had there been, maybe there'd have been a bit more newspaper mileage out of it. Now, the defence tried their hardest to rule the dental findings as inadmissible. They said they were non-scientific, but the judge allowed it in, and coupled with the statements from the witnesses, Gordon Hay was found guilty of the murder of Linda Peacock. He was the first person in the UK to be convicted by forensic dentistry. Now, because he was under 18, he's too young to be given a life sentence. He was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, which in the UK means it would be at His Majesty's pleasure, which is in the UK means it's indefinite. And it doesn't happen very often. I believe that Rose West is one of a few at the moment who is detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. And that means there's no parole. I think if you give someone a life sentence, you say a life sentence with parole after X amount of years, and you have to label it. Whereas at His Majesty's pleasure or Her Majesty's pleasure means you don't have to go through the parole shenanigans, and very few people actually have this, but I do believe that Rose West is one of them. Now, I can't seem to find anything on Gordon Hay. I cannot find anything on him. I don't know when he was released, if he was released, what happened to him in prison. Again, because I feel like the woman was the well-behaved person in this, there's less interest in it. So we don't know. All we know is that in 1968, 17-year-old Gordon Hay was detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. And that is that. And poor Linda Peacock's family had this terrible event happen. And by all accounts, it was avoidable. There was investigations later into how Loningdale House was run in terms of the laxity of the discipline, which sounds, I don't want to get into approved schools and prison and discipline and things, but if you're sending people somewhere who look like they are going to go off the rails or who have been in trouble with the law, I absolutely believe in rehabilitation. But by having no discipline whatsoever is going to not make any difference, surely. So I think that's even worse. What they all feared would happen from this approved school being next door to them happened, and it could have been avoided. And there was, a lot of people looking into how Loningdale House had been run afterwards. But obviously for Linda's family, that is too late. And that is the sad story of the death of Linda Peacock and the first UK conviction using forensic dentistry. Thank you so much to whoever recommended that. I love your recommendations. It's not that I don't have lists and lists and lists everywhere you turn in my house of things that I want to cover. But as I always say to my husband, I spend a lot of time going, you've got to be in the mood. You've got to be in the mood. It's really hard to research a case that you're not in the mood for. And so having your recommendations, it just makes my day, because I'm like, I haven't heard of that. Or, oh yes, that's on the list, but I hadn't thought about it for ages, so I'm going to go in. So thank you so much. As always, you can find me on social media, TikTok and Instagram and Facebook at the Monday Night Review. You can come and join the Patreon, which is a great way to support me and the podcast for less than a coffee, I think, at the moment, depending on where you are. A month, you get extra episodes. There's loads of extra stuff to read on there, extra stories. And yeah, as I said at the beginning, if you can share, subscribe, leave a review, it makes such a difference. And until next time, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seat before you drive.